Spider-Man Brand New Day from Sony Pictures in tandem with the Walt Disney Company and Marvel Studios is set to open at the box office this weekend in what many believe could wind up being the biggest box office film of the year. And finally, we have some tracking data available from Deadline magazine that we always like to use. They tend to temper their expectations, coming in on more the conservative side, probably more so than many others, and they're pegging this at about a $465 million global opening. But others out there, like Global Box Office, which is a recently popular account on X, is suggesting an even radically higher figure of potentially as much as $800 million. The crazy thing is that both of these estimates are within the realm of possibility. Here we go. All right, let's do this because I know a lot of you folks out there have a lot of questions. What is Spider-Man going to do? I think the safe assumption at this point is that we're probably looking somewhere at least around $500 million. But let's take a quick stroll down memory lane going back all the way to last Friday and Sean Robbins' box office theory tracking. He's got Spider-Man No Way Home, and we covered this a little bit on the Sunday show. If we look at this chart here, Spider-Man Brand New Day, between 228 and 274 million with a midpoint of 249 million. That is for the 3-day opening weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, that estimate alone would be magnanimous. It would be easily the biggest domestic box opening of this year and probably won't get touched by anything else potentially except perhaps for Doomsday later this year, about a week before Christmas. But at $249 million, we're talking about a movie that's going to pull in box office in similar fashion to what we saw back in 2021 with Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man Brand New Day doesn't have quite all the check boxes going for it like the previous installment did, bringing back former Spider-Mans Andrew Garfield and, of course, Tobey Maguire. That was a big pull for this. But there's a lot of variances to this Spider-Man movie compared to the last one that we need to look at. And going back to this chart for a minute. A 228 to 274 million, although incredible, is within the realm of possibility, especially when you consider that even some of the more conservative estimates out there are putting the domestic opening weekend just shy of 200 million, about 190 to 200 million in that regard. If it simply overperforms by a similar fashion to what we saw with, for example, The Odyssey recently, about a 30% overperformance in the dollars in terms of the projections, well, that's going to put Spider-Man No Way Home up around that $250 million mark. And don't forget, there's a lot of special access Spider-Man Brand New Day previews going on right now from Amazon at select theaters. And of course, you have a full big day of Thursday previews, all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And there's really not a whole lot else going on this weekend in the rest of the United States that's going to distract people from going to go see this movie. The World Cup is over. None of the big sporting events have picked up yet. But Spider-Man has typically, the last several entries, come in around Christmas time. Now, yes, before COVID, we still got those summer releases, but the last one came out at Christmas and was a big hit. But Spider-Man is not one of these type of characters or franchises that really is dependent upon the time of year that it drops. Let's look back at 2019's Spider-Man Far From Home. Did about $391 million at the box office, $740 million on the international side, $1.1 billion. Now, if you remember correctly, this movie released just after Avengers Endgame. This was a follow-up. I think, honestly, this movie probably would have done a little bit more had it not just followed Endgame. I think there was a lot of exhaustion and just kind of leftover stuff from Endgame that probably otherwise would have pushed this movie a little bit higher. But that being said, it still did extremely well. And again, these movies get worked on together between Sony and Disney, although these are firmly a Sony property, a Sony distribution, and Sony walks away with the overwhelming lion's share of the box office haul. One of the things I want to call to attention, however, and this is where the Spider-Man movies, particularly this new one, is a little bit hard to figure out where it's going to go. The Chinese box office was by far and away the largest contributor to the international box office for Far From Home, the second in the new Tom Holland Spider-Man entries. $205 million from China alone out of a total of $740 million of international box office. An incredible amount. Almost a third of the box office internationally came from China. And don't forget, what do we always remind folks about China? It has the worst return to domestic studios like Disney and Sony and Paramount, Universal, so on and so forth, of any international territory. Most other international territories, on average, return somewhere in 2025 and 26 around 40% of the retail box office. So if you do $100 million in international box office at the retail level, about $40 million of that on average is making its way back to, in this case, Sony or Disney or Paramount or Universal. When it comes to China, however, if you do $100 million in China, you're getting back more like 20, if you see much at all.
Perhaps you think you're being treated unfairly?
And that's what makes the performance of Spider-Man No Way Home in 2021 even more spectacular. Yeah, the international box office by itself for Spider-Man No Way Home outgrossed the entire global run of its immediate predecessor. Worldwide box office at $1.9 billion. And to even stick a pin in that, there was no China. China did not release this Spider-Man movie. The UK was the largest contributor to the international side singularly at $112 million. Imagine if China actually had run this movie, but then again, remember when this movie was going on. Yeah, we were still in COVID lockdowns.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer.
By the way, remember when studios and distributors, as they pumped out a bunch of absolute crap films in late 2020 into 21, and they kept telling us that, well, audiences still didn't want to go back to the theaters again? Yeah, that $1.9 billion in global box office gave the big middle finger to companies like Disney and everybody else that doubted this could happen. So let's go to Deadline and see what Anthony D'Alessandro has to say. Look out, here comes Spider-Man Brand New Day, $465 million worldwide opening, set to be the second biggest ever for Sony, that of course being behind Spider-Man No Way Home that came out in 2021. Spider-Man Brand New Day looks to eradicate all superhero fatigue with an estimated $465 million global debut in what is a 99% foreign footprint, meaning that unlike recently the Odyssey, for example, which had delayed releases, which is not uncommon for most movies, in countries like Japan, Korea, and China. Those countries are opening in some cases this weekend for the Odyssey. China is opening in August, I believe the first or second weekend in August. And that's mainly because China was going to make room for Spider-Man, this probably being a much bigger hit there, although don't think that the Odyssey is necessarily going to crash out in China. We'll talk about that later on in another video. This would stand as Sony's biggest reported global opening after its previous Tom Holland-Zendaya pairing in 2021 Spider-Man No Way Home, which began with an awesome $600 million worldwide start and ahead of 2003's Spider-Man 3's $381.6 million. Now, yeah, we're going to inflation bro that because a movie from 23 years ago at $381 million, quite frankly, would easily be around $700 million as a global opening today in 2026. So, let's put things in perspective here, kids. The prices of theater tickets have more than doubled since 2003, and you've got to take that into account when it comes to the number of butts in seats. And a lot of people out there want to ignore that, meaning that the almighty dollar is the end-all, be-all, and that may be true on a financial statement, at least when it comes to just theatrical exhibition. But bear in mind that when you have nearly twice as many butts in seats at the same dollar level as 23 years ago, or vice versa, that is going to bleed into ancillary sales. Things like when it comes out of the theater, when you watch it on TV or you buy it on physical media or PVOD in this day and age, or more especially, merchandise sales.
Merchandising. Come, I'll show you.
Among all the post-COVID global bows, Spider-Man Brand New Day is looking to rank third behind No Way Home and 2025's Zootopia 2 at $560 million worldwide, and ahead of 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness at $452 million, 2024 Deadpool and Wolverine's $440 million, and 2023 Avatar's The Way of Water at $441 million. Now, I'm not even going to bother mentioning the Chinese release of Ne Zha 2 that was also listed in that paragraph, because let's face it, the Chinese government lies about stuff all the time.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer.
Notably here, I want to call to attention the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness at $452 million, which was an anomaly for Marvel. And that was because it came off of the goodwill of Spider-Man No Way Home that came out just about 3 or 4 months before this movie did, of course, which also featured Doctor Strange in it and was virtually a lead-in to this film. And then the whole multiverse saga that became Marvel Phases 4 and 5 that overwhelmingly was a crash and burn financial failure for the Walt Disney Company, costing them billions of dollars in losses over the course of those 2 phases. And if you remember, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness barely went past a 2x from that $450 million, basically illustrating just how bad audiences responded to that film once they saw it. Now, to be clear, I don't think that's going to happen with this new Spider-Man flick. In fact, most of the early reactions that I've seen on Wednesday night from those that saw the Amazon early screenings are overwhelmingly positive. And of course, some of the cast involved in the film on the red carpet decided to leak the fact that, yes, in fact, Sadie Sink is Jean Grey, and she's kind of a villain in this one. So, surprise, spoilers, but not by the time you see this. Everybody will have known it. It's already all over the internet. Don't blame me. So what then do we make of Global Box Office's post? Is this just clickbait to get people's attention? Or is there some degree of mathematical merit to this, albeit on the outside of the realm of possibility? Well, let's look and see here. We're in uncharted territory that cinema has only witnessed once with Endgame. 300 million domestic and 800 million plus global weekends are in the cards. And they're basing this on figures that have been floated out there, which I can completely believe, that Spider-Man Brand New Day, at least as of 24 to 48 hours ago, had $60 million in domestic, North America domestic pre-sales, US and Canada, and $120 million in pre-sales total worldwide. Now, if you recall, a lot of tracking data with their various formulas to extrapolate a final prediction from this is kind of how this works. And Global Box Office may be using a bit more of an aggressive model when it comes to these predictions, but let's take it for what it's worth. They're looking at 120 million of global ticket pre-sales, 60 million here in North America, and suggesting that, well, based on 60 million in pre-sales, we think that 60 million will go 5-to-1 compared to walk-up traffic. So, for example, if you have 60 million in ticket pre-sales, that means that there's another 240 million that aren't going to buy their tickets ahead of time and that are going to walk up based on that exuberance of the pre-sales figure. Now, you can take that with a grain of salt. If Deadline right now is predicting around 200 million or so here domestically, another 265 or so on the international scale for a total of 465, maybe meet somewhere in the middle. But again, I think Deadline is probably being a bit conservative. I'd be a little surprised if Spider-Man No Way Home doesn't breach the $500 million mark by the time we get to Monday, when we get the weekend actual figures. And of course, internationally, the movie's already open in several territories, as it does on Wednesdays quite often. And at least here in the States, again, the Amazon previews on a Wednesday as well. So looking at this wild prediction, I would say that while it's probably outside of the reasonableness of probability, it is not outside the realm of possibility. Meaning that if you have a movie that is probably going to do, at least at a midpoint, around $500+ million in its global opening weekend, an $800 million global opening weekend, it's still within a reasonable standard deviation from the middle of that projection model. As crazy as that sounds. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, yeah, Spider-Man's going to do 750, 800 million. I'm saying it's possible. It's just simply not all that likely. The wild card here really is China. If we got $1.9 billion of box office from Spider-Man No Way Home without China, a $600 million opening for No Way Home without China. Well, what about Spider-Man Brand New Day with China in the mix? There's some reports that China may have at least 50 million, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if that number in China for its opening weekend might be closer to 100 million. That's where the wild card is going to come into play. And of course, the walk-up traffic is going to be a tremendous part of that. Either way, the final box office for Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to be a difficult one to beat with the rest of the films coming out there, including Doomsday. And we don't know much about that movie yet, although we're getting more trailer information and whatnot on it. I just wonder how much zeal there is to still go pump a ton of money into Marvel movies like they used to. Don't expect an Endgame type performance with that film. And yes, of course, Sony has given Marvel carte blanche to try to use this film to help lead in and set up the events of Doomsday, which I believe there's probably going to be, without a doubt, a post-credits scene for everybody out there to get excited about Doomsday, which is 5 to 6 months from now. Will that exuberance hold? Or will we wind up having another Deadpool and Wolverine situation, which we predicted several years ago before it came out, that was probably going to have a tremendous box office, but would absolutely not do anything to save the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's exactly what happened. People went to go see Deadpool and Wolverine because of the characters and the actors in it, and then went back to not caring about the MCU anymore. Spider-Man is another such character that elicits a lot of exuberance from audiences out there, but because it's Spider-Man, not because it's Marvel. And it doesn't guarantee success for Disney later this year just because Sony might wind up with a mega hit in the next 7 to 14 days. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll catch you on the next one. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.